The first time I heard the buzzing, I thought it was just a swarm of cicadas near the cornfield. But when I looked up and saw the flashing lights circling above my barn, my blood boiled. It wasn't just one drone, it was 3 of them, circling like vultures over my land. And then I saw them, the Karen sisters, standing on the edge of my property with smug little grins, laughing while their machines invaded my sky. They weren't just snooping, they were recording, flying low over my cattle, even spooking my horses. I told them once to stop, I told them twice. But Karens never listen, they feel rules don't apply to them. They mocked me, saying it's just harmless fun, but here's what they didn't know. I'm not just some farmer. I've worked for the FAA for 15 years. And if there's one thing I know better than tractors and soil, it's drones and exactly how to bring them down. So the next time they flew over, I didn't yell, I didn't chase. I went inside, logged into a system they couldn't even imagine existed, and with a single command, I grounded every last drone they owned. The look on their faces when their expensive toys fell from the sky, priceless. But that was just the beginning. They wanted a war, and they had no clue who they were dealing with. I wasn't just defending my land, I was about to teach them a lesson they'd never forget. Asterisk, the first time I noticed it, I thought it was just the cicadas waking up early that summer. I had been walking along the edge of my cornfield, watching the sunrise push streaks of orange across the sky, when I heard that strange buzzing. It was faint at first, almost like the whine of a mosquito close to your ear. But as I kept walking, the sound grew louder, more mechanical, more insistent. I shaded my eyes with my hand and looked up. That's when I saw it, a black drone circling above my barn like a hawk looking for prey. At first I didn't think much of it. Drones are common these days. After all, farmers even use them for field surveys. But what struck me as odd was the way it lingered. It didn't just pass by. It hovered. It tilted and dipped, almost as if it was trying to peek through the roof of my barn. My horses inside grew restless, snorting and pawing at the ground. The cattle in the nearby pastures shifted uneasily, their ears flicking at the unfamiliar sound. I waved my arms, shouting up at it like an old fool yelling at a cloud. Of course, the machine didn't respond, but someone, somewhere, had to be controlling it. My eyes scanned the edges of my property, and that's when I saw them for the first time. 2 women, standing at the fence line like a pair of vultures. Both had blonde hair, both wearing oversized sunglasses despite the early hour. Their faces were identical in expression, smug, entertained, untouchable. They held controllers in their hands, their thumbs moving with casual precision. The Karen sisters, that's what the locals had come to call them. Their real names were Melissa and Sharon, but the nickname stuck, and honestly, it suited them. They had moved into the neighborhood only 6 months earlier, into a massive house their late father had left behind. From the very beginning, they rubbed people the wrong way. They complained about the smell of manure from farms. They yelled at kids riding bikes too close to their driveway. And they treated every rule as though it was optional. Everyone tried to stay clear of them. Everyone, that is, except me, because my farm bordered their land. I shouted at them across the field, "Get that thing out of my sky." They just laughed, one nudging the other. The drone dipped lower, swooping right over the roof of my barn. The horses inside let out nervous whinnies. I clenched my fists. This wasn't just rude, it was harassment. "Don't be so dramatic," one of them yelled back, her voice carrying on the morning air. "It's just a drone. You don't own the sky." Maybe I didn't own the sky, but I sure as hell owned the land beneath it. And on this land, my animals, my work, and my peace mattered. Still, I bit back my temper and decided not to escalate. "I'm asking nicely," I said, keeping my voice firm. "Keep your drones off my property." They exchanged a look, smirked, and pretended to reel the machine back. It rose higher and zipped away. I let out a breath, shaking my head. Maybe it was a one-time thing. Maybe they'd get bored. But I was wrong. The buzzing returned the next day, and the day after that. It was never just once. Sometimes it was a single drone, sometimes 2, sometimes even 3 at a time. They hovered low, skimming over my fields, recording video of my animals. I caught them spooking the horses, circling so close that the poor creatures nearly kicked down the stall doors. I found my cows clustering together nervously whenever the noise filled the sky. When I confronted the sisters again, they only grew bolder. "It's not illegal," Melissa said one afternoon, leaning lazily against the fence with her sunglasses perched high on her head. "We're not touching your land. We're above it." "That's still trespassing," I shot back. "Prove it," Sharon chimed in with a grin. "You're just mad because we're having fun." Fun. That word stung. To them, this was entertainment, a game. To me, it was my livelihood, my peace, and the well-being of the animals I cared for every single day. But they didn't see it that way. They didn't care. It wasn't long before their so-called fun escalated. They began flying drones at night. At first, I thought it was fireflies when I saw faint blinking lights through my bedroom window. But no, these were the sisters' machines, hovering outside like mechanical spies. The high-pitched buzzing filled the stillness of the night, and their lights flashed across my walls, keeping me awake. One even circled around to the roof of the farmhouse, scraping against the gutters as though mocking me. I stormed outside with a flashlight, waving it into the sky, shouting for them to knock it off. Somewhere beyond the fields, I heard laughter, loud, unrestrained, and cruel. The next morning, I went into town to talk to the sheriff. He shook his head sympathetically, said he'd have a word, but there wasn't much he could do. Drone laws, he explained, were complicated. As long as they weren't physically damaging my property, it was tough to enforce. Just ignore them, he suggested. Ignore them. Easy words from someone who didn't have sleepless nights or stressed out animals. Easy for someone who didn't have buzzing machines invading their sky every single day. I realized then that nobody was going to stop them from me. If I wanted peace, if I wanted my farm back, I'd have to take matters into my own hands. That night, as I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee cooling between my hands, I thought long and hard. The sisters believed they were invincible. They believed they could do whatever they pleased because no one dared challenge them. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that I wasn't just a farmer. By day, I tended to crops and livestock, but I had another life, another skill set they had no idea about. For 15 years, I'd worked for the FAA, specializing in drone regulations, signal interference, and flight safety. I knew the rules better than anyone. More importantly, I knew the weaknesses. As I stared out the window at the dark sky, hearing the faint hum of another drone in the distance, a calm resolve settled over me. The Karen sisters thought they owned the sky, but soon, they were about to find out that I could take it away from them, one drone at a time. Asterisk. The next morning began like any other. The sun was just creeping over the horizon, painting the fields in soft gold, and the air smelled faintly of dew and soil. I stood on the porch with my coffee, listening to the birdsong that usually brought me peace. But beneath that natural chorus, I caught it again, the faint, sinister buzzing. It was still early, but the Karen sisters were already at it. Their drones zipped across the sky like oversized hornets, dipping lower over my barn roof, circling the water trough where my cattle gathered. For a moment, I considered storming across the property line again and yelling at them, but I knew it would only fuel their smugness. They thrived on attention, on the idea that they were getting under my skin. No, this time I would take a different approach. I set my mug down, walked inside, and pulled open the drawer where I kept a black laptop I hadn't touched in months. This wasn't an ordinary computer. It was a secured FAA-issued device, tied into the systems I had clearance for. As part of my job, I had used it to track local drone activity, monitor flight patterns, and enforce no-fly zones near airports and government buildings. I wasn't supposed to use it for personal matters, of course, but when harassment reached this level, I figured defending my livelihood was justification enough. Booting it up, I typed in my credentials, the screen glowing a cold blue as the system came online. Within minutes, a map appeared showing every registered drone operating within a 50-mile radius. Each one appeared as a blinking dot, with identification numbers and signal strength data beside them. I zoomed in on my farm, and sure enough, 3 red dots pulsed just above the property line. Melissa and Sharon. I leaned back in my chair, watching the live feed of their toys darting around my airspace. The software gave me options: tracking, reporting, and, if necessary, signal interruption. It was the last option that drew my eye. With the right command, I could sever the connection between controller and drone, forcing the machine to power down. It wasn't destruction, just forced compliance, like yanking the cord from a misbehaving puppet. But I didn't press the button right away. Instead, I studied their patterns, watching how they flew. They liked to swoop low over the barn, then circle back over the fields. Sometimes they'd dive close to the horses, almost taunting them. My jaw tightened as I watched one of my mares rear up in panic, her ears pinned back. Enough was enough. I waited for the right moment. The first drone made another pass over the barn, its camera pointed downward like a spying eye. My fingers hovered over the keys. One command, that was all it would take. Finally, with a calmness I hadn't felt in weeks, I pressed enter. The dot blinked once on the screen, then froze. Out in the field, I saw the drone stutter midair, lights flickering. A second later, it dropped like a stone, crashing into the tall grass with a muffled thud. I couldn't help but smile. The sisters, standing at the far end of the property, gasped loud enough for me to hear across the distance. Sharon waved her controller furiously, her arms flailing like she could somehow will the machine back to life. Melissa screamed something I couldn't make out, her voice shrill with disbelief. I leaned against the porch post, pretending to sip my coffee as if I hadn't noticed, but I wasn't finished. Their second drone zipped forward, buzzing angrily toward the cows. I tapped another command. The second machine jolted, then spiraled downward, smashing into the dirt near the pasture fence. The cattle scattered, lowing in alarm, but none were hurt by now. The sisters were shrieking. They dashed into the field, skirts flapping, stumbling over tufts of grass as they ran to retrieve their fallen toys. Their controllers were useless in their hands, nothing more than plastic bricks. I let them sweat, let them panic. Then, just for good measure, I locked onto the third drone. It had risen higher, maybe in a desperate attempt to escape whatever force was grounding its companions. But height didn't matter. With a final keystroke, I clipped its wings. The third drone faltered, tilted sideways, and plummeted into the far edge of my cornfield. 3 strikes, 3 crashes. Silence returned to the farm. The sisters stood frozen, their faces pale as they clutched the broken remains of their machines. From where I stood, I could almost see the mix of confusion and rage twisting their features. Melissa pointed toward my house, her mouth moving furiously. Sharon shook her head, gesturing wildly at the fallen drones as if demanding answers. I stayed on the porch, calm as ever, sipping what was now lukewarm coffee. Finally, I raised my voice just enough to carry. Maybe the sky doesn't like you anymore. Their jaws dropped. Sharon stomped her foot like a child, denied candy. Melissa screamed something about calling the police before storming off toward their house. I almost laughed. The irony was delicious. They had been the ones trespassing in the first place, and now they wanted to play the victim after they left. I walked out to the field where the drones had fallen. Their sleek black shells were cracked, propellers bent. They weren't beyond repair, but they wouldn't be flying again anytime soon. I picked one up, feeling the weight of it in my hand. Expensive, no doubt. I almost pitied them, almost. Back at the porch, I set the wreckage on a table and leaned back in my chair. For the first time in weeks, the farm was quiet. No buzzing, no flashing lights, no smug laughter drifting across the fields. Just the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the soft lowing of cattle, and the steady beat of my own heart finally at peace. But I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The Karen sisters weren't the type to accept defeat gracefully. They'd be back, fueled by rage and entitlement, convinced they had been wronged. And when they came, they'd come louder, angrier, maybe even with reinforcements. The difference now was that I wasn't afraid of them anymore. They thought they were queens of the sky, untouchable with their machines. But I had clipped their wings with the press of a key, and next time, if they dared return, I'd be ready to teach them an even harsher lesson. For now, though, I simply leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the silence settle over the farm like a protective blanket. The battle had begun, but for the first time, I felt like I was the one in control. For 2 days after the fall of their drones, the farm was quiet. I almost believed the Karen sisters had learned their lesson. The sun rose each morning over calm skies. My animals grazed peacefully without the constant whine of propellers. And for once I slept through the night without flashing lights in my window. I told myself, maybe, just maybe, they'd finally realized they had crossed the line, but deep down, I knew better. People like Melissa and Sharon didn't quit. They didn't reflect, apologize, or back down. They doubled down, and sure enough, on the 3rd morning, I got my proof. It started with shouting. I was in the barn mucking stalls when I heard 2 shrill voices outside, loud enough to cut through the clatter of pitchforks and buckets. I stepped into the daylight, wiping my hands on my jeans. And there they were, the Karen sisters, standing at the fence line again. Their faces were twisted with fury, red-cheeked sunglasses perched high like crowns. Melissa screamed, jabbing a finger toward me. You sabotaged our drones. I raised an eyebrow, keeping my voice calm. Sabotaged? They fell out of the sky on their own. Maybe you should have bought better models. Sharon stomped her foot. Don't play dumb. We know it was you. Nobody else had anything to gain from ruining them. I leaned against the barn door, arms crossed. Gain? The only thing I wanted was peace. Maybe you should have thought about that before terrorizing my animals every day, they sputtered, exchanging glances. Before Melissa hissed, you haven't heard the last of this. We'll make sure everyone in this town knows what kind of man you are. With that, they spun on their heels and stormed off, muttering to each other. I shook my head, half amused, half wary. Their threats didn't scare me, but I knew they meant trouble. The trouble came faster than I expected by that evening. I got a call from the sheriff. His voice was careful, professional, but I could hear the unease beneath it. We've had a complaint, he said. The sisters claim you damaged their property. 3 drones. To be exact, they're demanding we press charges. I let out a humorless laugh. Charges? They were trespassing, flying those things over my land, spooking my animals. I know, the sheriff sighed. But I still have to check it out. Rules are rules. When he came by, I showed him the broken drones lying on my porch table. I also showed him the security camera footage from my barn, the machines circling low, startling the horses, buzzing near the cattle. The sheriff scratched his head, clearly caught between annoyance and disbelief. Look, he finally said, you've got solid evidence here. They were reckless. I can't prove you brought them down, but I can see plain as day they were causing a disturbance. I'll file it as a civil matter. Don't expect it to go further than a warning. That should have been the end of it, but the sisters weren't finished. If they couldn't win through their drones, they'd use their mouths. Within a week, they spread rumors through town claiming I was some paranoid old man who attacked them without reason, that I was jealous of their modern hobbies, that I had nothing better to do than harass them at the feed store. I caught 2 neighbors whispering as I walked past. At church, a woman avoided eye contact when I tried to shake her hand. The Karens were poisoning the well, and they knew exactly how to do it. Loud, relentless, and with just enough lies to sound believable to people who didn't know the whole story. But gossip was one thing. What they did next pushed me past patience. One night, long after midnight, I woke to the sound of an engine outside. Peering through the curtains, I saw headlights sweeping across my fields. My stomach clenched. It wasn't farm equipment, it was a car. And there at the wheel were the sisters. They were driving along the property edge, blaring music out the windows, honking the horn, flashing their brights toward the barn. My horses whinnied in alarm, hooves clattering against the store floors. My dogs barked furiously from the porch. I stormed outside, flashlight in hand. "Have you lost your damn minds?" I shouted across the field. Melissa stuck her head out the driver's side window, hair wild in the wind. "How do you like it now? Huh?" she shrieked. "How do you like being harassed?" Sharon leaned out on the passenger side, cackling, "This is what you get for messing with us." I clenched my teeth, fury burning in my chest. But instead of chasing them, I did something smarter. I raised my phone and filmed the entire scene. Every honk, every scream, every cruel laugh. Their car headlights flashed over my barn. Their music thundered into the night, and my camera caught it all. The next morning, I sent the footage to the sheriff's office. Within hours, the sisters got a visit. They weren't arrested, but they were warned loud and clear that trespassing and disturbing the peace at night could lead to serious consequences that should have humbled them. But no, the Karens weren't wired that way. Being scolded only made them angrier. They weren't going to stop. If anything, they were going to escalate until they broke something or someone. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about drones anymore. This was about control. They wanted to dominate the skies, the land, the neighborhood. They wanted everyone to bend to their chaos. And I had dared to push back. I wasn't just fighting for peace and quiet anymore. I was fighting to keep my farm from becoming their playground forever. That evening, I sat on the porch, staring out at the fields bathed in twilight. My laptop sat open on the table beside me, its screen glowing faintly. I had tools the sisters couldn't dream of, knowledge they couldn't touch. And if they wanted war, I would give them one. But I wouldn't shout or stomp or blare music. No, I would strike where it hurt most, silently, surgically, with the precision of someone who knew every rule of the game better than they ever could. The Karen sisters had poked the wrong bear, and the bear was just starting to wake up. The next few days dragged on like a storm cloud hovering just above the farm. Every time I stepped outside, I half expected to hear that hateful buzzing again, or the blare of music from their car at midnight. My animals remained skittish, their nerves still raw from the constant harassment. The peace of the farm, the peace I had worked years to protect, was hanging by a thread. I knew by then that talking, warning, and even humiliating the sisters by dropping their drones wasn't going to be enough. They weren't just reckless, they were obsessed. The drones had been toys, yes, but they were also symbols of control. Taking them down had wounded their pride, and now they were lashing out like cornered animals. If I didn't put an end to it soon, I worried what they might try next. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at the screen's cold blue glow. The FAA system hummed quietly, a web of information at my fingertips. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. I had used it once to drop their drones, but now it was time to use it properly, to make their behavior not just a neighborhood nuisance, but a matter of official record. I pulled up the log of drone activity in our area over the past few weeks. There they were, flight after flight, dozens of unauthorized takeoffs, all traced to the same registered IDs. Not only had the sisters flown repeatedly over private property, they had done so at night, in residential areas, and far below the legal altitude. Each violation stacked like bricks in a wall of evidence. I compiled the data, pairing it with my own security footage and the nighttime video of their car prowling my fields. I added statements about how their flights spooked livestock, endangered animals, and created noise disturbances. The more I pieced together, the stronger my case became. By the time the sun rose, I had assembled a report thick enough to choke even the boldest lawyer, and when I hit submit, sending it straight to the FAA Enforcement Division, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The sisters had made this personal, but now it was official. For 2 days, I heard nothing. The sisters continued their gossip campaign in town, sneering when we crossed paths, shouting petty insults from their porch. I ignored them, waiting, biding my time. Then, on the 3rd day, the hammer finally dropped. I was working in the field when a pair of government SUVs rolled down the road, their windows tinted, their license plates unmistakably federal. The vehicles stopped at the sisters' house, and 3 men in suits stepped out, carrying clipboards and briefcases. I leaned on my shovel, watching from a distance as Melissa and Sharon burst out of their front door, their voices shrill with confusion. The men spoke calmly, firmly. Papers were handed over. The sisters' faces turned pale, then red, then pale again as their arms flailed in protest. Sharon pointed toward my property at least twice, her mouth twisting as she shouted. The officials didn't so much as glance my way. They just kept talking, writing, and eventually walking the sisters back inside their house. By evening, the news spread fast. The FAA had hit the Karen sisters with a laundry list of violations: reckless operation, unauthorized night flights, low-altitude flights over livestock, and repeated harassment of private property. The fines alone were staggering, enough to buy 3 new drones for every one they had lost. Worse for them, their registration had been suspended indefinitely. They weren't legally allowed to operate drones anywhere in the country. When I saw them the next day, they looked like deflated balloons. No more smug sunglasses. No more laughter. Melissa clutched a crumpled letter in her fist, glaring at me from across the fence. Sharon muttered something bitter under her breath, but for once her voice held no confidence. I stayed calm, meeting their eyes without a word, but of course, they couldn't leave it there that evening. As the sun dipped low and the fields glowed orange, I heard them shouting again. They stood at the edge of their property hurling insults across the fence. "You ruined us," Melissa screamed. "You're obsessed. You're sick." Sharon pointed at me, her hands shaking. "Do you think this is over? We'll find another way. You can't keep us down forever." I didn't rise to their bait. I simply stood on my porch, arms crossed, letting their rage echo uselessly across the field. They were thrashing against the bars of a cage they had built themselves, and nothing they screamed could undo the fact that the law was no longer on their side. Later that night, as I sat on the porch with the stars glimmering overhead, I thought about how far things had come. When it started, it was just drones buzzing above my barn. Annoying, yes, but small. Yet their arrogance had driven it to this. Fines, bans, humiliation. It struck me then how people like the Karen sisters always thought they were untouchable. Rules were for everyone else. Consequences were for other people. They believed they could bully, cheat, and push until the world bent to them. And when finally someone stood firm, they didn't know how to handle it. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. No buzzing, no flashing lights, no blaring car horns in the dark. Just silence, the kind of silence that comes when justice is finally starting to do its work. Still, I wasn't naive. The sisters weren't finished. They were humiliated, furious, and desperate. People like them didn't lick their wounds quietly. They'd be back, in some form or another, and when they returned, they'd be louder and angrier than ever. But now, I wasn't just prepared, I was ready, because I hadn't just grounded their drones. I had clipped their wings. And when someone like that loses the sky, the fall that follows is inevitable. For a few days after the FAA officials left their house, the Karen sisters were strangely quiet. The fields were calm, the skies clear, and my animals finally relaxed. I wanted to believe it was over, that the fines, the ban, and the humiliation had finally broken their will. But people like Melissa and Sharon didn't just disappear quietly. Pride kept them alive more than anything else, and losing control of the skies was a wound they couldn't stand to live with. It was on a Saturday evening when the storm finally came. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of purple across the sky. I was closing the barn doors when I noticed headlights creeping along the dirt road. At first I thought it was just a neighbor passing through, but then I heard the bass of loud music rattling the night air. My gut tightened. The sisters' car rolled into view, bouncing slightly as it veered off the road and pulled up near my fence. They stumbled out, both of them dressed in black hoodies, their hair wild, their movements frantic. Melissa held a small bag in her hand, while Sharon gripped something long and metallic. I squinted, heart pounding. It wasn't a drone, it was a baseball bat. "Enough is enough," Melissa shouted across the darkened field, her voice trembling with rage. "You think you can ruin our lives and get away with it?" Sharon slammed the bat against my fence, the wood rattling under the blow. "We're done playing nice," she screeched. I didn't move closer. Instead, I raised my phone and started recording again, steady and silent. The camera caught everything, their faces twisted with rage, their bodies trembling as they tore at the fence like vandals in the night. Melissa yanked out spray paint from the bag, shaking it furiously before scrawling crude insults across my fence posts. Sharon smashed at the boards with her bat, splinters flying under every strike. My animals stirred nervously in the barn, sensing the chaos. I clenched my fists but kept calm. If I stormed out, they'd escalate. If I provoked them, they'd lash harder. But with every second I filmed, their fate sealed tighter. Finally, Melissa spotted the glow of my phone camera. "You think that's going to save you?" she shrieked. "We'll destroy everything you have." But before they could act further, headlights appeared again, this time from the main road. A sheriff's cruiser slowed, its red and blue lights flashing across the fields. The sisters froze like deer caught in a spotlight. The officer stepped out, hand resting on his holster. "What's going on here?" he demanded. I raised my phone higher. "Caught them in the act," I said calmly. Melissa's face drained of color. Sharon dropped the bat, her bravado vanishing in an instant. They tried to speak, stumbling over excuses, blaming me, blaming the system, blaming anyone but themselves. But the officer wasn't having it. He walked the fence line, shining his flashlight over the broken boards and the wet spray paint still dripping down the wood dot. By the time he turned back to them, his expression was stone. "That's enough. Both of you, hands where I can see them." The sisters cried out, shouting that it wasn't fair, that they were being targeted, that they were victims. But the cuffs clicked shut all the same. For the first time since they had arrived in this neighborhood, their smugness was gone. No laughter, no arrogance, no entitlement, just two women red-faced and trembling, dragged toward the back of a squad car while their world collapsed around them. I stood there in silence, the night air cool against my skin, my phone still recording until the cruiser's lights faded into the distance. When the quiet returned, it felt different than before. This wasn't just a pause between battles. This was the end. That the next week confirmed it. Word spread through town faster than wildfire. The sisters had been charged with vandalism, trespassing, and harassment. Their fines had doubled, their reputations shattered. Neighbors who once avoided me now nodded in respect, whispering about how the Karens had finally gotten what they deserved. I repaired my fence, sanded down the spray paint, and tended to my animals, who had already shaken off the memory of that chaotic night. My farm breathed again, free from the weight of their presence. The sky above was wide and clean, no buzzing, no flashing lights, just peace. Looking back, it struck me how easily it could have spiraled worse. If I had fought them with anger, if I had met their chaos with more chaos, maybe the story would have ended differently. But patience, proof, and quiet persistence had won the war. And in the end, the Karen sisters weren't defeated by me alone. They were defeated by their own arrogance. That was the final lesson of it all. Some people think they own the world, but eventually, the world reminds them who's really in charge. And on my farm, at least, peace was back for good this time.